And can we have a warm round of applause to welcome Rich to the stage?
Hello. If anybody saw me last time I was here, don't worry, I won't be eating any insects, so you'll be fine. Or will I? No, this one, I'm going to talk about what's called the emotionalization of the ecological crisis, and that's why I didn't just have another drink. Or how to grieve a glacier, because there's a thing happening. Those of us that study emotions, a lot of us are starting to study the emotions of the climate crisis, particularly people who are at the sharp end of it, people who are already affected by it. And we're starting to see commonalities come out of people who've had problems in the world and aren't like a lot of us privileged people going, oh, look, the climate crisis is sort of going to be happening. They're going, no, now it's happening right now. But also, why is that people do weird things and kind of we're not moving any quicker than we should be on an emotional level, which is kind of linked. So here is a poem. The sun itself finds nothing to love save soft rivulets of water its rays release from eons of hard frozen look. But I tell you, I do love this blue-white giant and grieve its leaving, even though I thrill to watch thunderbolts of ash crash into azure seas. And that's called How to Grieve a Glacier. And it kind of encapsulates this feeling that we are spotting around the world. But also, a great example of this, and you could take anything that is climate related, any disaster that is clearly climate related. This is a good one, Super Typhoon Yolanda, or Typhoon Haiyan as it's also known, on the 8th of November 2013. Now, this typhoon, well basically it had the same wind speeds you get in Midwest American tornadoes, but it was 318 miles across. It was bad. And it hit the Philippines. There are 6,352 reported deaths. We think it's probably nearer 10,000 because not everything's reported, not everything's recorded. 4 million people displaced. It was a terrible time, and it wasn't the smallest typhoon that we've had since. Others have followed, bigger, nastier ones. One of the people affected by this, called Anlian Diaz, she noted that people behaved in certain ways. Oh, wonderful, thank you. I knew there'd be a gadget somewhere. And now I need to remember which button it is. And she said that things like, she said, when there is no electrical power, people get sort of crazy, insane, looking for somewhere to charge their gadgets, looking for signals. Whenever they see people converging together, they think there is a signal for the phones, or whenever there's a queue, they think there's a generator to charge their gadgets. Prices of food shot up. It was terrible, very awful, very hard. Because one of the things that happens when you are hit by one of these crises is you start to try and look for belonging, for community. You try and get the people close to you together, which makes sense. And all these, what you have is a combination of people who are upset, angry, and kind of annoyed. And it's this cluster of feelings called solastalgia. Now, I'll get to what that means in a moment. But it's a word that's been coined to describe an emotional cluster. Now, what's an emotional cluster? Well, there's one of us that, as a bunch of nerds, we all feel every day. It's an emotional cluster we call love. I'm sure we all fall in love every second, every day, with everybody we see. Lots of people think that love isn't a specific feeling emotion, that there's not just one neural pathway. It's a combination of oxytocin, which makes us feel belongingness towards things, and lust, which makes us feel a lot of belongingness towards things, and a few other bits and pieces, sometimes frustration for the thing we're attached to. It's a cluster of emotions that becomes this thing we call love. Solastalgia is a similar cluster associated with the survivors of climate crisis events. So, basically, this guy, Glenn Albrecht, he came up with it. It's from the Greek solis and the Latin algia, or back to front. I think I may have got those back to front. The Latin solecia. I took Latin for 5 years and don't understand, not one word. Yeah, the Latin solecium for solace and algia, which is suffering and grief. And these are what we find. People report being furious, being angry, as you can imagine. Why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to my town? Why is my village being destroyed? Fear, because going through basically a 300-mile tornado is terrifying. Having your land flooded is terrifying, so you're going to be frightened. Grief, which I'll get more into in a second, it's a particular kind of grief. Shame, which seems odd, and a loss of home and identity, this kind of missing something that's gone. Now, these last three, these kind of particularly come together. And I'll use the words of, again, the people who've been through this. This is Ecological, that's how she's pronounced it, apparently, chair of the Inuit Council. She's from an area of the world where the ice is receding. And she says that there are marine people for whom the sustainable use of the marine resources and the future of the Arctic Ocean and sea ice is not a luxury, it is life itself. And that's that loss, that grief. It's a grief for your world, your homeland. It's what makes you you, your people, your culture. The thing that's rooted on is being swept away. And that's part of solastalgia. Again, the Australian wheat belt farmers, where they're having terrible droughts. Their crops aren't working quite as well as they used to. They're having all sorts of problems. They say it's like a death. There'll be a grieving process because the farm embodies everything that the family is, as they find themselves moving from the farm and getting jobs in cities because nothing to do. So that is solastalgia. That's the feeling, this cluster of feelings that seems to happen. It's the same groups of emotions, same groups wherever we look. Now, a lot of people in this room, because we're here and because we may be going this weekend to one of the marches, I might do Friday morning, I've got to leave then, but we have empathy. We may feel that feeling. We may share in a level of the solastalgia. But the problem with emotions is you get two types. You get the ones you anticipate and the ones you've actually directly experienced. Now, if you anticipate emotions, you imagine them. You might use them to make a decision. You might say, I don't want to, if I do this, maybe I'll succeed. If I do that, it might fail. Depression and anticipation are both thought of as quite strong anticipated emotion because they are based on trying to predict the future or trying to think if you can alter the past quite often. Experienced emotions, however, what you're feeling right now, which I'm hoping isn't boredom, but we'll see, they can be reactions. They can be so powerful that your prefrontal cortex doesn't bother. You just get angry very quickly. Or you get frightened and you just run. It's off. I'm checking the back. You just get off straight away. And then afterwards you go, whoa, I was terrified then. Or I was angry then. That's how powerful in the moment emotion can be. And they attach to something. And because of that, they're kind of acute. And so people who've experienced solastalgia firsthand are always going to have a much more powerful emotional reaction to the climate crisis because they've lived it and breathed it. But those of people that haven't, they often fall into certain emotional traps. Now, I'm going to talk about Norway. I have nothing against Norway. I'm not picking on Norway for any other reason than it's a really good example. Norway's a lovely place. My wife did a gig there last year. She said it's fantastic. But Norway has an odd double life when it comes to climate, when it comes to the environment. So these are the predictions for Norway. Apparently, they think there's going to be increasing temperatures of about 3.5 degrees to 5.5 degrees there. The rainfall's going to go up. There's going to be bigger storms. The waterways are going to become more acidic, shorter seasons, and so on. They are, historically, a world leader in green technology. They have electricity generated from water coming down from mountains and have done for decades and all this stuff. They also produce 2% of the world's oil and 3% of the world's natural gas, and it's 60% of their export income. So they have this double kind of life. And this is growing because of the Ukraine invasion, as you can imagine. So, how do you square these circles? I mean, we all do it. Some of us drive petrol cars or diesel cars, and then we get out of them and go on the Green March. And that kind of thing. It's just... Now, there are three things known as attitude. Who here's got attitude? Bunch of nerds. You all got attitude. Come on now. But that's not what we mean. When we talk about it in social sciences or in sociology, we're talking about the inner conversation. So we're talking about the adaptive function, the fact that we're all here seeking similar views with like-minded people. The self-expressive function, which is the desire to let each other know how we feel. I don't know what they're talking about. Stood here with a mic. I don't get that at all. And these two, which are important. The ego defense function, which is how we explain to ourselves why we believe what we believe, and the knowledge function itself. And they supposedly make up our inner conversation. They're kind of how we guide ourselves through life. They create our attitude. I'll go into it deep, but I've got 4 minutes left. So, the most famous of these dysfunctions with the ego thing is cognitive dissonance. Who's heard of cognitive dissonance? Bet you haven't. So, cognitive dissonance, for those who don't know, cognitive dissonance is when you hold basically two conflicting views at the same time, and you just do. You know, for example, you may drive a fossil fuel car, but be very, very, very green in what you do, have solar panels. Or you may, just to use an example, you may call yourself an environmentalist and vote Tory. I don't know. It happens, apparently. That kind of thing. It's things that just don't seem to work out and your brain ignores them. Then you've got selective interpretation. That's feeling calm and comfortable. That's my next door neighbour's cat. My cat wasn't there for a photograph because she was busy having a tantrum at me again. Apparently I didn't stop it raining. Anyway, so, but for example, when people surveyed in Norway, this came up a lot. They would say, yes, but Norwegians are close to nature, that they are humble people, that they love the land, and they say, we're all about the land and the things. So, you know, that's kind of, that's fine. We interpret ourselves in this way. We don't interpret ourselves as fossil fuel producers, and that a huge chunk of our economy is based on that. They look at this part, just that part. Then you've got perspectival, I've only had one drink, perspectival selectivity. And this is the angle one brings to bear on certain events. So you might say, yeah, we produce oil, but it could be worse. We could produce more oil. Or you might say, it's not our fault. Look at America. They produce loads more. Look at Russia. Look how much they make. Or you could say, well, we've done all we can. We can't produce less than this. This is, you know, what can we do with our economy? We're only a small country. These are all quotes from Norwegians asked about how they square this circle. And then you've got claims to virtue. And this is interesting. They'll say, well, our gas and oil's cleaner than Russia's. It's better for the environment, our oil. So you're better off buying ours. If someone's going to buy it, they may as well buy ours. Or they'll say, look, we've got decades of green policies, so we're balancing it all out. We're offsetting everything, so it's fine. Now, the problem with this is that it's not just Norway. It's a lot of us. Those of us who haven't faced solastalgia head-on tend to use these as excuses, tend to use these as ways of avoiding issues. Well, I've got to do that. And it causes consternation. Now, what does this mean? I shall be quick with this because I've got a minute and 30 seconds. What I think is going to happen is this emotion, solastalgia, the further we go into this crisis, the more this is going to become a common feeling. The more we're going to have to talk about it, the more of us are going to directly feel it, and the more of us are going to have to, you know, live with it. History has told us that when the entire world is flooded with a particular emotion, things can change. Better or worse? We'll see. So, back in 1475, the Ottomans invaded Constantinople. The easiest way to get through the Silk Road was cut off, so everybody went this way across the ocean to find the East, and they found this huge, great continent. As a result of that, a lot of people start to think, oh, that's weird. Nobody mentioned that. Maybe Aristotle and the Bible didn't know everything. And so people start to doubt their religious leaders and argue for things like Protestantism. And so, off the back of that, we had the worst wars we've ever had per capita in Europe. Lots of people died. At the same time, this war led to more wonderful diseases being spread around the world. And because of that, there's more famine. And because we had the printing press, everybody knew about all this. It wasn't quiet. You either had it read to you or you read it. So what happened was a massive climate of fear. A lot of people who study the early modern period in Europe talk about it as a climate of fear. I know! I'll be quick! They talk about it as a climate of fear. And that climate of fear, that climate of Aristotle and the Bible didn't know anything, led to some pretty terrible events like the witch trials, trying to find someone to blame for the way the world was. It also lent to a complete re-evaluation of the way the world worked. A little thing called the Enlightenment, and the scientific revolution was born of this fear as well. So I have a question. Maybe the last person speaking can help answer it. Maybe we can chat about it in questions. Solastalgia, is it a blessing or a curse? That this feeling is starting to happen. If we get enough of it, if people, those of us who are empathetic to it, who are a bit less distant, a bit less there with the issues of attitude and ego defense, will that drive more and more people to try and do something about the climate crisis? Or will the fact that a huge amount of the world, the worst polluters, don't feel this directly, just mean we'll go on until we all do at a time when we really don't want to? So that's my question for you all. I'll leave it there, because I'm a minute late. Any questions?
I'm going to start with a tangent. So sorry, what's English sweat?
English sweat. It was a really weird disease. It was around for about 15 years. And literally it was people sweating themselves to death. It came and went and was recorded, and we've not seen it since. So it obviously died. It killed all the people it's going to kill, then didn't pass on anymore. It's also what happens to me after the 5th pint. But everybody here is discussing the time they had English sweat now. No, I had that once. I had this curry. It was amazing. I'm going to work this way.
Quick one. Is there an antonym for solastalgia?
Is there an antonym for solastalgia? I don't know. Not really. Ignorance. Privilege. I don't know. Is privilege an emotion? No, I don't think so. Not really. Climate change denial? I don't know. Maybe. I'm coming that way.
Yeah, thank you. So you talked about the limitations of empathy and defense mechanisms and
Yeah.
cognitive dissonance. So is there a way that looking at emotional science you can use that to spur the right sort of action? So, you know, you've got nudge theory and stuff like that. Is there a way of essentially getting people down the right path?
The way of getting people on the right path, and it's always the way, sadly, is to make them feel things about it. That's the way. You can always convince people. We've all been through a couple of elections in the recent years, mentioning now it's Brexit, where the side that got the feels won, and the side that had the facts lost. And that happens a lot. So facts are very important. No, not throwing any shade. First, facts are really important. We need to be armed with facts, because facts will allow us to get into people's emotions and get them to feel about this topic and have backing to it, not just be making crap up so they can feel angry at us for lying to them. But just in general, we need to make people connect with what it means, with what the climate crisis means, and what it means to them day to day, and try and get more people, or generally everybody, understanding that it's scary, actually, if we don't do anything. And we're doing a lot, but we need to do more. We need to make it less scary.
Is there a danger that the emotion becomes so strong that it slips into the feeling of doom and there is nothing we can do, everything's lost? Is there like a sweet spot where...
There is, but the question is there a point where the emotions become so strong we just slip into doom, despair, and go too far? Is there a sweet spot where it's powerful? Well, firstly, a lot of the work I've read on solastalgia doesn't really report many people saying, I'm in despair. They do initially, you're going to be. Your house has gone, your family may have gone, awful things have happened. But it's more determinism. This thing drives them, that kind of combination of the shame, because they kind of feel like, why didn't I do more to stop this? Because humans are daft like that. And this sort of need to stop it happening will often drive people to do stuff. There's not much doom and gloom from people who've experienced it. They want to change things. They like most of the people who are in these things are now activists, and they try and change it. But I don't know. It's very hard. Humans aren't as prone to doom and gloom as you might think. Generally, historically, we just do daft things like witch trials and panic and blame the wrong people for things and point at. I'm going to get political in a minute. I'll not mention small boats. We point at the wrong people to try and cause out problems. So, anyone else? Oh, go there.
So, the quick question about sort of the role of the news media. I saw just today that Fox News settled, I think, the biggest ever defamation case in the industry. So, I guess the question would be, what role do you think the news media might have in playing a role in communicating these emotional messages?
They could be a lot better at it, generally, yeah. Oh, blimey. I'm just hoping that was a big enough lightening of a certain Mr. Murdoch's wallet that he will think twice about lying again. Can't promise anything, but, you know, that's a big chunk of change. I mean, if he doesn't think it is, then I'll have it. But yeah, the media seem to be, I don't know. The media... Again, I don't know quite how they're playing it, because in some ways they're quite good. Some of the media are quite good at saying this is what's happening. But you do get the odd person coming in who's obviously a climate change denier and has got an agenda and gets a lot more print time than they should. It's that whole thing when they say at the BBC, when they try to, for balance, they'll phone up people scientists who want to talk about the problems of the climate crisis, and they'll have a list of 1,000 people. But for balance, they'll spend 2 days looking for the one professor who was kicked out of his university 10 years ago who's like, no, it's all the sun. And they'll drag him on to make it look even. And they need to do less of that. They need to work out that balance isn't necessarily, sometimes one side's that big and one side's that big.
I was just wondering if in any of your research you've found evidence that trauma responses have an effect on people's motivation or ability to take action or to communicate effectively.
Yes, I will. Have I come across any research that showed that people's trauma responses have an effect on their ability to take action? The research I've been reading, not so much. It's usually a determination to do something about it. But I am specifically, at the moment, researching solastalgia, which means my research is quite targeted, a particular group of people who've said a particular bunch of things. And it is something I'm interested in. Is there a trauma element? Is there an element of PTSD that can hamper this? Is there an element of global PTSD on the way, which is basically what solastalgia kind of is, that we need to prepare for, and we need to have facilities for. I suspect so, the way the human mind works. It's not good with trauma. It either fights or it runs away. That old amygdala doing its job again. But there's not a lot on that at the moment for climate change. Although now you've made me think of a paper I could give, so thank you for that. Yes, you.
Thank you very much. I was wondering, in your view, to what extent solastalgia is scalar. So do people connect more or have more emotional attachments to things that are close to them? So, for example, their local community or the land in which they grew up?
Generally, yeah, that's... Oh, yes. I keep forgetting that. I promised I wouldn't. Is solastalgia usually connected more to local things, to the communities they grew up, the areas? It's kind of very powerfully cultural. A lot of it is based on our culture has been swept away, like the Inuit representative who said that the ice is our life. Once it goes, we've got nothing. We are not here anymore. There's nothing here. And the Australian farmers who are, where's my farm gone? You know, the wheat shell farmers. That's kind of, it's a very, very personal, local thing. Again, it's about it being experienced emotion. They have no idea what we're feeling about this in the room over here. But they do know that their ice is disappearing. And that they can see it disappearing, and that's their culture. Their culture is very much tailored. And it's a lot to do with how a culture relates to its landscape. If I was doing a longer talk, I'd waffle on about that for a good 15 minutes, about the way the culture and landscape both combine, and space works on emotion. And it's a very good example of that. Solastalgia is based on the way that emotion and space and culture link together quite often. And when it's taken away, you're left with this feeling, especially if it's, doesn't need to be.
Could you just explain the definition of solastalgia a little bit more? Because I thought solace was like to take solace as comfort. Is it like comfort in grief, or like what does it actually mean?
Yeah, it's kind of, I didn't come up with a word. He's using that sort of idea of comfort because it's the idea that which is comforting you is gone. I'd probably call it desolastalgia or climate grief or something. But I think he wanted a word that made you just not think of sadness, because it's not necessarily sadness. It can be anger and it can be loss, which isn't quite the same. It's kind of, there's a chemical in the brain you may all have heard of called oxytocin. And basically, it's a fuel in the belongingness engine. You get it when you are connected to someone. You get more of it. And you also get it for things you're connected to and places you're connected to. Douglas Adams, the greatest philosopher that ever lived, once said that we are connected to the place we are born by tendrils of guilt. And that's kind of, again, it's that sort of, that oxytocin. And so I think what it is it's that kind of feeling of almost love for somewhere, and that love is now unrequited because it's gone. And it's more solitude than solace, I guess. But yeah, not my word. I would have picked a different word. Bit of time.